But
there you go. It says live.
It says live. Good. Hello. Good afternoon, Thomas. Good to see you here. If you're joining us, welcome to this show. This is my first ever live broadcast, so I'm experimenting today, and I'm really glad to have an old friend with me, Dr. Thomas Slivnik. He's not just an old friend; he is an expert in many things. He is an expert in technology. He's also a freedom activist, and he knows a lot about the political and economic situations in various countries around the world. So I'm delighted to have Thomas with me this afternoon. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, David. I'm delighted to be here.
Fantastic. So how are things with you? What's in the news at the moment is there's a lot of talk of an energy crisis and bills going up, and everyone's worried about that, particularly here in the UK. I mean, how is that with you?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to be in the whole of Europe, at least, isn't it? I mean, this energy and food crisis and inflation, I think it's a European-wide problem. You know, what I find interesting is that people say, well, there's going to be a food crisis which is going to affect third world countries, you know, Africa and so on. But I wonder if it's really going to be the people on the margin that are going to suffer. You know, because Russia doesn't consider African countries to be unfriendly. It does consider America and Europe to be unfriendly. And America has its own food and its own energy, but Europe doesn't have either. So I think we could see problems across the whole of Europe.
Yeah, that's the thing. The Western mainstream media is really talking up this conflict with Russia over the Ukraine situation. But it's a very interesting point because Russia's designated Western Europe and North America as unfriendly countries because they've been very unfriendly to Russia. Whereas Africa, China, India, Turkey, these countries, in the majority of countries around the world, are still designated friendly countries. And they haven't been making all these bellicose statements about the situation in Ukraine. In fact, they haven't been saying much at all. So they may be better off.
Yeah, it's I mean, you know, I think the actions of European politicians have not been have not been in the best interests of the European citizens, in my opinion. I mean, you know, for reasons that we're going to touch on maybe later. I think this is completely the wrong conflict to try to be involved in at all.
Yeah. I mean, I was saying from the beginning, this started on February the 22nd, something like that. This is not something that we should be getting involved in. It will be the easiest conflict to avoid and just for it to never happen in the first place. I mean, why do you think that Western leaders actually stoke this up rather than trying to de-escalate the situation from the beginning?
It's a good question. I think it's difficult to know, you know, what the people's motivations are. I think the trouble is that a lot of Western leaders these days are not really their own men and women. And I think there's been kind of a trend over the years that people that are allowed to rise to the top are people that are compromised. I think we see that a lot. You know, a lot of people have a lot of skeletons in the cupboards, and the people that get nuked, you know, the people that are not allowed to rise to the top usually get sabotaged, you know, get roasted in the media over very small infractions, whereas people with the big infractions are given the get out of jail free card and allowed to rise to the top. And I think the people that are pulling the strings are not the people that are formally in power. So it's, you know, it's very questionable who's actually pulling those strings. And I mean, if you look at Biden, you know, his family has supposedly received a lot of money from China, you know, Ukraine, Burisma, the people like Ihor Kolomoisky. So, you know, when you receive that kind of sum of money, that probably affects your thinking. So, you know, is it? I mean, you know, is it bad thinking because they are making mistakes, or is it an agenda? Is, you know?
I certainly think there is some kind of agenda, because you see a lot of these people who are in power are linked to the World Economic Forum, but maybe there are other groups behind that are even more powerful. We know the money men in BlackRock, Vanguard, these big hedge funds who seem to, obviously hang around the World Economic Forum people and pull a lot of the strings, because they have billions and trillions of pounds in money. But it seems that Western governments are paying billions of pounds to Zelensky in Ukraine to keep a war going, which is completely unnecessary. And there's a growing feeling in the UK, I think, around the West, that this is not what they should be doing. They should be putting their own people first. But as you alluded to, they're actually serving other masters apart from their own people. And it's ironic because Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, other people, they keep on going on about freedom and democracy, but it doesn't seem as though they're actually supporting real freedom and real democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, if you look at the number of top leaders that are former World Economic Forum Young Leaders Program graduates, it's quite astounding, isn't it? I think it's Trudeau. I think it's Macron. I don't know the full list, but I think Jacinda Ardern as well. There's all these people are graduates of Klaus Schwab's program, so you kind of wonder, how much influence he has. I think also a lot of the Estonian and Finnish people. So, I sort of shifted my exact stance on this conflict from the beginning. When the conflict started, I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't expecting an invasion. I was surprised by it, and my initial reaction was, well, that's Putin made a mistake. Maybe there's a pact between China and Russia that Russia will take Ukraine, China will take Taiwan, and then the West can't fight both. So maybe that was a secret plan. And I thought that's it's very bad. But my view was from the beginning, to us, Taiwan is of such strategic importance that we can't afford. Even if we thought it was absolutely the best thing to do, we cannot afford to fight on those two fronts, and we have to keep our powder dry to defend Taiwan if necessary. That was my initial reaction. Obviously, since then, I've learned a lot more about the background to the Ukrainian to the conflict in Ukraine, and I've been very unhappy about the way Zelensky has been trying to drag us all into an all-out conflict. For example, with initially my sympathy was poor Ukrainian people, but I'm thinking hang on a minute, asking for a no-fly zone, which means World War III. It means hot war between NATO and Russia, and he wasn't just asking for it once; he kept asking for it, and so he alienated me a lot. And I've learned a lot about all the other issues. So my position on the moral case for our involvement has shifted. But I think our existential case has always been the same. I don't think this is a conflict we can afford to be in. And yet I think it is not really a conflict between Ukraine and Russia. I don't think I'm saying anything new. I mean, it's a proxy war between NATO, which is the same as the US and Russia, in a sense, isn't it? Yeah. And so it's not that we got involved respectively. I think we've been involved from before the war even started.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people who've been looking at this and looking beyond what is said in the Western mainstream media understand that this isn't just something that happened out of the blue in February 2022. It's something which has been building up for 8 years or so, because the West has been helping really bad elements in Ukraine, such as the Azov Battalion, the right sector, who are real, national socialists, and to kill ethnic Russians in the Donbass. And so, I can see a case for Putin going in to protect those people and, to stop them from being killed. 14,000 of them killed over 8 years. But I mean, I want to come back to another point, because you sort of mentioned earlier there that there is, another situation you think that is more important for the West than Ukraine. And I know your ideas have developed over the last 6 months, but back in the beginning, you would have said perhaps that the situation in Taiwan is far more important for the West to be involved in or stop a conflict. I don't know how you would see it, than Ukraine. So can you explain why Taiwan is maybe more important to the West than Ukraine, even though that's not something that is being spoken about hardly at all in the mainstream media.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's two aspects. Why would we? What will be our consideration as to whether we should, take a particular stance in relation to a conflict between, two third-party nations to which the West has no treaty obligations either way. I mean, Ukraine, there's no security agreement with Ukraine or with Russia. Therefore, any involvement that the West has in that war it would be based on our interests, our own existential interests. And you could say argue the moral case. And so in the Ukraine, clearly from the the moral case, initially I thought there was a moral case maybe to help them a bit, but when I've learned about the Azov battalion and all these other things in Ukraine, I think the moral case is very not there really at all. I mean, in fact, like you point out, I mean, there were bad things happening in Donbass, it appears. But of course, when it comes to the what's in our interest, effectively, if there's a war between Russia and Ukraine, and we are not involved, what is the worst that happens to us? Not a great deal, right? I mean, so by getting involved in this conflict, we've effectively lost access to Russian and Belarusian fertilizer, to Ukrainian grains, to Russian gas, Russian oil. I mean, this is massively destructive to us. So because we got involved in this war is causing us inflation, is causing us potential food and fuel shortages this winter, which is massively damaging and dangerous for us, and that would not have happened if he had stayed out of this war. So from an interest point of view, there would have been virtually no consequences to us if from this war if we hadn't got involved. When it comes to Taiwan, if China were to conquer Taiwan or somehow incorporate Taiwan by other means, and then there's various ways that could be done. It could be through a military invasion. It could be done through, the argument, look, you're on your own. We're going to invade you unless you do this and that. And the U.S. is not going to come and help you. And the U.S. has lost a lot of credibility, both through the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which is completely botched, of course, and also the involvement in Ukraine. I mean, the American standing in the world has suffered tremendously because it's very clear that the West is involved in this war. And the way it looks to me is Russia is winning this war, and it's one thing to say we're not involved and then Russia wins, and another thing we stake our entire reputation on this and then Russia wins the war. Then American reputation as a potential defender of Taiwan is in tatters. China says, well, America's not going to come and help you, and so Taiwan can be put under tremendous pressure. But you see, we can't afford to lose Taiwan, because Taiwan has a chip manufacturing industry, and if we lose access to that, for example, if China takes over Taiwan and China says, like Russia has said to the West, you're unfriendly, you can't have our gas or our oil, or you can only have limited amounts. If China were to say you can't have Taiwanese manufactured chips, we would be back to the Stone Age. And I mean, you may think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not exaggerating. I mean, literally, we could be back to the Stone Age. And I suppose I can explain in more detail why, but those chips are of absolute strategic importance to us. We cannot not defend Taiwan.
Yeah, I mean, that's very good points. I mean, you make about it would have been better not to go into Ukraine, because now we've lost access to a whole load of goods, raw materials and so on that come from Russia. We all know about the oil and the gas, but also fertilizer. You make a good point there. And that means that a lot of farmers are suffering. This actually, I think, is hurting farmers in the third world, immensely, because the price of fertilizer has gone up. I mean, that's what happened in Sri Lanka, but there was another reason for that as well. But, that's affecting Western farmers too. But the whole chip industry in Taiwan is not something that many people know too much about. We all have devices and gadgets. We have our iPhones and Samsung Android phones and laptops and so on. But it seems the case that every device we have, almost every device we have, has a chip or chips that are manufactured in Taiwan. So it might be a bit of news to some people that there isn't really anywhere else that can manufacture semiconducting chips, computer chips, which are as advanced as the ones you get from Taiwan. I mean, how did this situation come about? And is there any possibility of that changing anytime soon? Anyone building any new factories in the West, or is it really the case that, you know, if we lose Taiwan, there's no other place? I mean, couldn't you make them in Korea or Japan or you know, Germany? I mean, is there no other option?
I mean, these are all very good questions, and I think some people, you know, I think a lot of people do realize that Taiwan is the home of the manufacturers of, you know, most of the world's advanced semiconductors. But I don't think, at least not in public, nobody has recognized and acknowledged the full extent of the implications of that. You know, I've had Nigel Farage was interviewing Donald Trump, and he asked him, you know, he's concerned about the Taiwan situation because of Taiwanese semiconductors and the impact on the automotive industry. And I'm thinking, yes, that's all true, but the automotive industry is the least of our problems. And Tucker Carlson said recently, you know, our important companies depend on TSMC, the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company, like NVIDIA and Qualcomm. Yes, that's true, they do, and they are important companies, but it's way more important than that, because I think what people don't realize is that we have become, you know, the modern way of life really requires semiconductors, and specifically semiconductors made in this one company in Taiwan, for virtually everything. So, I mean, you know, you say, okay, we lose semiconductors, so we might have some trouble with our computers. We might have to go to the old ways, you know, use pencil and paper. Well, to start with, all the offices are so automated. We rely on emails, you know, or on Microsoft Office, on, you know, on web, Google, on all this stuff. You know, all offices are completely computerized. So all offices suddenly become unable to function if we lose access to computers. And of course, you'll say, well, but we don't lose, you know, if Taiwan goes offline, we don't lose access to computers. There's other people, there's Intel and other companies and that make chips, and, you know, and we have computers. We don't lose them overnight. And the problem is that, yes, okay, so, but, you know, you buy a computer, how often do you replace them? Most people replace them after 3 years, and even if it's after 10 years, that means that every year you have to replace 10% of everything you have. So pretty quickly, a lot of these computers would become unavailable, either break down or, you know, for all sorts of reasons. The other thing is that there are certain components, and quite a lot of components, that are really only made at this one company. For example, if you look at graphics chips, every computer has a graphics chip in order to be able to display something on the screen. And there's only 3 major manufacturers of graphics chips. One which makes them integrated into the CPU. That's Intel. That's an American-based company that manufactures in America. But those are, you know, those are much less powerful. The only 2 companies that make discrete graphics chips, the more powerful graphics chips, which typically drive, you know, displays that would certainly on a gaming laptop, anything but maybe, you know, on a server you might use an Intel integrated chip, but on any sort of powerful computer you will use one of these discrete graphics chips. They're made by AMD and NVIDIA, and both AMD and NVIDIA graphics chips are manufactured. All of them are manufactured at TSMC in Taiwan. And when it comes to microprocessors, you know, all AMD microprocessors are made at TSMC in Taiwan. About half of all ARM chips for mobile devices, you know, all Apple chips, except the most advanced servers, but all Apple chips, all laptop, desktops, iPads, iPhones, iPods, all those chips, the microprocessors are made at TSMC in Taiwan. So you lose access, you know, all these companies lose access to the chips that are essential to build computers. But, you know, it's not just that. It goes beyond that, because the manufacturing that is still in the West, of which there isn't a lot, because a lot of it's already in China, but say in German manufacturing, American manufacturing, whatever there is in Britain, it's all computerized. You know, we use automated manufacturing lines which rely crucially on computers, robots, you know, 3D printers. So all the manufacturing lines, you know, as soon as something breaks, you don't have a spare part, and it goes beyond that, you know, because also all agriculture is computerized. You know, first of all, you know, advanced large-scale agriculture, they use drones for spraying, for monitoring pollinators, for monitoring crops. You know, they use, I mean, just tractors. They're like cars. They have chips. You can't, you know, you don't have the chips, you can't make a tractor. And it's not like you can just start making old-fashioned tractors which don't have chips. It's not like you can start making manufacturing lines in the old-fashioned way, which don't require chips. I mean, it would take 10 years to retool those manufacturing lines. And the trouble is, once this happens and the supply chains, some element of some supply chain becomes unavailable, the whole supply chain stops working. And when the supply chain stops working, how do you restart the whole supply chain? Because it's so circularly dependent.
Yeah, I mean, we've already heard stories in the news, about sort of car manufacturers not having enough chips coming over. There's a delay in the supply line, so there's a 6-month wait for certain things. So people have to wait longer to buy a car. I mean, we've heard stories like that already, but I mean, you're painting a picture that is far, far worse than that if the situation should arise that TSMC is the biggest semiconductor manufacturer in the world, is in Taiwan, and China takes it over, then we may have a situation where the supply lines will be completely cut. And then that's it. We would really have to go back, 20, 30, 40 years in technology. Is that's the case?
I mean, it's very difficult to say just how bad the effects could be. But, like if you imagine where we're heading this winter because of the conflict in Ukraine, right? Germany is already switching off street lights and heating on the swimming pools and telling people to take cold showers. So there is, I think, a legitimate reason to expect there's going to be fuel shortages, heating shortages, food shortages in Europe. And, if this is the ideal time for China to make a move on Taiwan. I mean, they may not. Who knows? They may not. But it is we are at the most vulnerable. So, if there was a very interesting article I was reading the other day about, about the conditions in the Taiwan Strait. When are they the most suitable for invasion? And it turns out that the sea is rough or the winds are too strong, and that there's 2 months in the year, which is April and October, which are the most suitable, in terms of the for an amphibious assault. So I mean, obviously that's just around the corner. But also in America is probably at its weakest point at the moment. In the midterms, you could have a Republican landslide. You might not. I mean, I think people are saying that even though by all right, it should be, that there might not be, but potentially there could be a Republican administration in the Congress after January. So potentially America is at its weakest, Europe could be at its weakest, and if China were to move on Taiwan now, and we were to lose access to that, there is no telling how far back that could push us. If we lose access to computers, offices, access to manufacturing lines, and it doesn't take a lot for a manufacturing line to break, right? You just need one screw to be missing, and the whole line doesn't work. One part is missing, the whole line stops. One chip is missing, you can't make the car. And if you do agriculture production, this is, we're talking about going before information revolution, before industrial revolution, before agricultural revolution. I mean, this is, maybe crazy talk, but, it's possible.
Yeah, and that's worst case scenario, but it's certainly going to have a big impact on all of our industry, all of our manufacturing, as you say. But America is in a really poor state at the moment. I mean, this administration they've got is terrible. I mean, it's really bad for America, really bad for the world, and they just seem to be on a mission to destroy their own country, it seems to me. But obviously we know a few weeks ago you had Nancy Pelosi as a speaker in the House of Representatives went over to visit Taiwan. It seemed like she actually did visit that TSMC plant, but I was questioning why did she go? What was the purpose in her trip? I mean, she seemed to say it was just a private trip to look at her investments or something, but China was up in arms. They were really, really unhappy about that because they have the one China policy, and that's been in place since the end of the Second World War, isn't it? They basically threatened, if Taiwan declared independence, then the Chinese Communist Party would invade. And that's been the situation for, coming up 7 decades or more. But I mean, why do you think, Nancy Pelosi seemed to go, and she's saying this is just a private trip. I think there might be more to it than that. But I mean, why was China so unhappy about her trip? And would there have been another way to deal with that?
I mean, first of all, this is the absolute worst thing she could have done. And a friend of mine in Washington says, well, the Speaker of the U.S. Congress has the right to visit a U.S. ally anytime she wants, and that is correct. I mean, of course, the Speaker should be able to visit an ally of the U.S. anytime the Speaker wants. But the Speaker should be thinking: is this in the U.S. national interest? Because when you go and visit an ally, hopefully the idea is that you're promoting your national interest, and this visit is completely detrimental to the U.S. national interest and the Taiwanese national interest as well. Because, I mean, one thing that the conflict in Ukraine has exposed, which I wasn't aware of before, I mean, possibly the military experts were aware of it, but I wasn't aware of, what it's exposed is that Russians and the Chinese have hypersonic missiles, right? And these, so certainly we can see that the Russian ones work. They've hit some distance targets a very large distance and just completely destroy them. And these hypersonic missiles are a game changer, because one hypersonic missile, and they're capable of carrying nuclear warheads, but even with a conventional warhead, it can sink an aircraft carrier. It has a long range, and there's no defense. The West doesn't have these missiles, and we have no defense against these missiles. So, I think we're very vulnerable, because the U.S. aircraft carrier fleet is just been, I mean, maybe obsolete is a strong word, but it's been made much less important and geopolitically because of these hypersonic missiles. I mean, if China has these hypersonic missiles, how does the U.S. even defend Taiwan? We should not be trying to cause a conflict. We should be. I think we should, the West, what the West should be doing, if it was acting in its own best interest, was, to not try to antagonize China, not try to provoke a conflict between China and Taiwan. Obviously, at the same time, make clear, do not cross this line, do not go there, because there will be a response, and we will prevent it, and we will defend Taiwan, and we will defeat you. We have to signal that, obviously, in a diplomatic way, because I think even saying, we will defend Taiwan, I think there's strategic ambiguity. I think even saying that very overtly is perhaps risky thing to say. I mean, I don't, I'm not a diplomat, so I don't know how you should convey that message. But I think that's the message that should be conveyed in a diplomatic way. And the U.S. needs to, become, make sure that it's capable of defending Taiwan, and to develop a response to these hypersonic missiles. In my opinion, this trip, is just like a red rag to a bull. Why would we want to, we want to make sure that the conflict doesn't happen, and if it does happen, then we need to defend Taiwan. We do not want to try to provoke the conflict, and then Biden would surely not actually go and defend it. So we're doing the opposite of what we should be doing.
I mean, Biden in the US, his administration, it seems to have changed the wording in some of the documentation to take out the fact that they recognize that Taiwan is part of, a united China. And that seems to be something that people have noticed. And it's almost like they're building up to something. They've sent the USS Ronald Reagan, their top aircraft carrier, to the area. And then it's been, the Chinese have then done military exercises off the coast of Taiwan, inside Taiwanese waters, for the first time in a very long time, after Nancy Pelosi's visit. And then you've got UK officials saying, oh, well, we got the right to visit Taiwan as well. I mean, so what should these people do? I mean, these aircraft carriers, the US Navy, it seems to be in the general area of Taiwan. People are still saying they're going to visit. What should they do? Should they change course on that, or should they, actually pull back much further, but still, signal their strength in some way?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to the question as to what the U.S. should be doing with the aircraft carrier fleet. I mean, in a sense, I think, it's a fine line. And the trouble is, when you have authority, when you have credibility, when people know not to mess with you, then people do not mess with you. When you lose that credibility, as America has lost credibility in Afghanistan and with Ukraine, then it's very difficult. Like, if you have a credibility, you don't have to do a whole lot. You just have to kind of, let it be known that if they make the wrong move, then there will be consequences, and nothing will happen. But if you have no credibility, if you're just seen as weak, then you can do whatever you want. You can withdraw from the Taiwan Strait. You can go to the Taiwan Strait. They will not take you seriously. And I don't think China takes Biden. I don't think anybody takes Biden seriously.
He should be in jail, to be honest. I think the things his daughter has said, that I don't know how on earth he's still president, to be honest. I mean, it's absolutely appalling for America and the rest of the West. But do you think it can change in the midterms are coming up? People are talking about, if this were a fair election, I don't know if it will be, but if it were a fair election, I would expect the Republicans to walk this, take control of the House, take control of the Senate easily. I mean, whether they do or not, I don't know. But if they do you think that might change and give, a bit more of a semblance of strength to America, even though you've got this lame duck president in for another 2 years?
Yeah, I think the trouble is that we're in such a period of uncertainty and instability, and likely increasing instability this winter, that it's really hard to say what the net effect, or what the net change from today to say January or February is going to be, assuming that the Republicans retake both the House and Senate, right? What was going to be the net effect? So for sure, right? I mean, right now, America, in a sense, is at its weakest. It's got a lame duck president. It's got a vice president that's no better. It's got a speaker of the House of Representatives that's completely compromised. All this. Is it Nancy Pelosi's son, Biden's son, John Kerry's son, and who else was it
Mitt Romney's son?
Mitt Romney's son. They all served on the boards of Ukrainian energy companies. And collected fat checks, right?
Yeah.
And then Nancy Pelosi's husband made a ton of money through semiconductor investments just before Congress passed some legislation affecting semiconductor companies. So these people are very compromised. So the U.S. is in as weak a state as it could ever be. So obviously, and it's an if, because if you listen to Tucker Carlson, he said, I think he's very astute, and he said, look, by all accounts, there should be a landslide. But if you look at the statistics and the polling, that's not what they show. So I wouldn't bet on the Republicans taking the House and the Senate, for all sorts of reasons. I mean, partly there could be another, what's it called now? The Dominion voting systems.
Oh, that Dominion Smartmatic. Yeah. I got hammered by that in the London elections, I think. Yeah.
I mean, we could have that. We could have a fair election, but there's, there could be that they will lose. I mean, because for all sorts of reasons. But let's assume that there is a Republican administration in the Congress and the Senate, so the U.S. will be stronger. It's still, it's still not super strong, because the presidency is very important, and the presidency will be as weak as ever. But the European allies will, how is Europe going to come out of this winter? Probably not very well, right? And so you're going to have what Biden's done is completely destroyed all of America's alliances. That's perhaps the biggest thing he's done. I mean, the Five Eyes is practically non-existent now. They made AUKUS because both Canada and New Zealand are so unreliable that they had to make AUKUS. I think this is kind of a new Five Eyes minus Canada and New Zealand, which I don't even need to say how unreliable and compromised they are. So you have the Five Eyes that is weakened. You have NATO that is weakened. You have the Quad that is weakened, because the Biden administration has been pushing India into the arms of Russia by trying to force India to impose sanctions on Russia, which has only pushed India into the arms of Russia. But Russia is also in an alliance with China now, and therefore India has been mending fences with China. So you're now that's weakening the Quad. So all of these alliances are weaker. So even if the U.S. itself is strengthened by, say, January or February, these alliances are important. If the U.S. has this, these alliances in a good shape and strong, then the U.S. can project power, across the world. But if all these alliances are in tatters, and you have, on the other hand, Russia, China, India, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Venezuela, that control the majority of of the world, energy supply, food supply, gas supply. I mean, then America is still weak.
Yeah.
So it's not, and because of all these other effects, it's not clear whether the net effect is up or down.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, what we would like ultimately, and we'll finish off in a minute, but what we would like, we don't really want war. I mean, if you're a sensible person, you want peace, and you want to, that might be an uneasy peace, but you want peace, and you want to be able to continue to trade with people. You want people's rights and, for freedoms to increase. I mean, real freedoms, not the fake freedoms that sort of Western leaders talk about after 2 years of like locking us down and taking away our freedoms. They got some gall to gaslight us with like pretending that they're for freedom and democracy. But we want to be able to continue to buy gas from Russia, to buy fertilizer from Russia, and we want Taiwan to stay autonomous. It might not be declared an independent nation, but it can be effectively continue as an autonomous society, and where we can continue to buy these semiconducting chips from, because everyone in the world needs them, without sort of having a sort of the dragon of the Chinese Communist Party in charge. So it seems that's that should probably be the aim that we have as the goal. It doesn't seem like people have that as a sensible sort of final purpose as to what we want to get out of our relations with these countries. They just want to play geopolitics, like a couple of teenagers sitting around playing a board game almost. I mean, so if you were say an advisor to the UK Prime Minister, whoever's in next, we're going to get either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak. We talked about Biden a lot. I know exactly. But what would you advise them to do to reach that aim of still being able to trade with Russia and to trade with Taiwan? Or do you think that they are not interested in that, and they wouldn't even sort of worry about that at all?
Well, the trouble is I think we know that there is a green agenda at play, right? So there is this drive. We must reduce our use of fossil fuels. We must get used to, you will own nothing, you will be happy, eating bugs, not eating meat, all this kind of stuff. There is this agenda, and a lot of these people are fully signed up members of this agenda. I mean, Boris Johnson's wife is a fully signed up member of the green agenda. Half of European leaders are signed up to this agenda, and so it actually kind of suits them to have this food crisis, energy crisis, because people are forced into that way of life, whether they like it or not. So I'm not really sure that they want to improve things for us. Now, I mean, I think Liz Truss, from all the rhetoric, she's going to just escalate the UK's involvement in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I think it's absolutely not in the UK's interest. Rishi Sunak just wants to print more money. I think I've not followed their. I think it's completely irrelevant because it's just another WF puppet. Who's going to be okay. So.
And that's terrible, isn't it? Because the sensible things, to be able to get stuff for your country, to be able to grow your economy, they don't seem to want that. Like you said, they are committed to this net zero agenda, this climate alarmist agenda, the World Economic Forum, and they don't care. They don't care about how badly they damage relations with Russia, how many Ukrainians die. I mean, I have no sympathy for the National Socialists, but now you've got poor boys from Western Ukraine being sort of taken, forced to go and fight on the front line against this, really well-trained Russian army. So the poor flower of Ukraine is being killed off by Zelensky, and they don't seem to care. They're just bellicose, their rhetoric and so on. I don't know what they think about, semiconductors in Taiwan, because they don't seem to have even really spoken about that too much. They're committed to the net zero, but are they committed to, keeping trade open with Taiwan or not? I don't know. They haven't really said anything about that, so it's kind of a blank in there in what we know about them.
Well, I mean, I think I haven't heard anyone speak about that. It's kind of an interesting question. I mean, I would hope that they want to continue, Taiwan to prosper and for Taiwan, to be able to trade with Taiwan, because if they don't want that, they really want us to go back to the Stone Age and die off of hunger. I mean, I just don't think anybody's really talking about it. I don't get the impression that anyone has really looked into the detail as to the consequences of Taiwan to us. People know that, yes, they have chips and yes, they're important, but maybe we can do this, maybe we can do that. They don't realize we are dependent on Taiwan, for our office infrastructure, for our manufacturing infrastructure, for our agriculture infrastructure. Without it, we don't have that infrastructure. There is no way to replace that infrastructure. I haven't talked about it yet. There is no way to replace that infrastructure. There is no other fab that has, comparable technology. Even if it did, doesn't have the capacity. Even if it did, it takes 10 years to bring online. So I don't think nobody that I know of in the West has picked up on that in any detail. I think, to me, that's the biggest worry. I think it goes beyond, above their heads, the technological details.
Yeah, well, that is it's an appalling thing that people don't realize that, but it's something that is as important. So maybe we need to go forward and sort of elevate the knowledge about the Taiwan situation as much as we know about the Ukraine situation, so that we can come to a good end there. But anyway, that will be a good end politically, but I think that's a good place to end our discussion for today. Thomas, thank you so much for being my first ever guest on my live stream and experimenting with me with all this new technology. So it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me.
David, the pleasure's been mine, and the honor of being your first guest is also mine. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Have a great day.
And you. Take care.